Hello, welcome to my slideshow about Linux. Linux is an operating system that has only about 4.5% of the global desktop computer market share. Contrasted with Windows at 72% and Apple at 15%, Linux is much less used. So why even consider Linux? Linux has several unique benefits that can't be matched by Apple or Windows. Linux is cheap, fully customizable, and powerful. Linux is free. Linux is free and open source. It can be downloaded for free and distributed without concern of licensing requirements. Windows is not free and has licensing fees. Mac OS is technically free. However, it can only be used on Apple hardware, which is notoriously expensive, so Apple cannot compete with Linux in terms of cost. Linux is fully customizable, far more than Windows or Mac OS. It's open source. Anyone can modify Linux, and it's already been modified with several different distributions like Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Arch Linux, Linux Mint, and Pop OS, each one being slightly different. Beyond that, each user can customize the terminal, window manager, and the shell, along with having full control over the OS. Linux is powerful. For one, Linux can run on almost any hardware, from something simple like a Raspberry Pi to more complex multi-core servers and supercomputers. Linux is not as resource intensive as modern Windows, so it can be used on older hardware. It's also very stable and can run for long periods without needing to reboot, unlike Windows. Also, Linux has the dominant market share when it comes to servers, web hosting, data centers, and cloud computing. Since Linux is so good, even 4 gigabytes of RAM is plenty for Linux. So then, why don't more people use Linux? For one thing, there's a technical barrier due to the interface that it sometimes uses. Another reason is that PCs don't come with Linux pre-installed, but come with either Windows or Mac, and most people never bother to change it. Another big reason people don't use Linux is because of software compatibility issues. An unexpected benefit of having Linux is that its relatively small user pool means that not many viruses and malware can affect it. The architecture is completely different. No OS is completely secure, but Linux's permission system make it especially resistant to tampering, and its active global community provide consistent security updates. Another major annoyance that affects Windows is the update system. The updates are often forced, and the user cannot do anything about it. Even worse, after the update is complete, something that was working before often breaks, sometimes causing severe problems. This has happened to me many times. On Linux, auto updates are off by default and no updates are forced. This alone is the reason why I will switch to Linux. Windows also collects data from users, and Mac OS is just a little bit better in terms of privacy. But Linux collects very little data from its users, and what it does collect can be controlled or stopped. Privacy and control over one's data is one more big reason why using Linux is a great choice of operating system. Hello, this is my desktop computer that I recently switched over to Linux Mint. Since I switched to Linux, I noticed that I had several misconceptions about Linux. I thought it would be difficult to install. It was actually easy. In fact, as someone who builds computers frequently and installs Windows on them, I noticed that Linux Mint was actually easier and faster to install than Windows. Next, I thought software compatibility would be an issue, but it has not been. Every program and game that I use, I have been able to use on Linux Mint. Next, I thought that it would be complicated and I would have to use programs like Terminal to do programming to get anything done, but that's not been the case. I've only had to use the terminal once, and it was optional. Next, I thought that it would be a driver issue since my computer is a custom build with many different parts from many different manufacturers, and even with Windows, it's very difficult to install all the drivers from all the different manufacturers so that it works well. With Linux Mint, I had none of those problems. Everything worked right out of the box, no driver downloads required. And lastly, I chose Linux Mint because it's a distribution that is very easy to use for users who are coming straight from Windows. I can 100% say that has been the case. Linux Mint has been very easy to use, and I would 100% recommend it.